To start our vascular seed plant section, we will begin with the gymnosperms. In this grouping, seeded plants that have vascular tissue, we have two groups, gymnosperms and angiosperms. So this particular presentation will focus on the first one of those, the gymnosperms. Gymnosperm means naked seed. The seed of these is exposed on the surface of the scales within the cones, and these are all cone-producing plants, even though sometimes what is referred to as a cone may not necessarily look like what we think of when we think of cone. They're not all pine cones. Some of them, I think the juniper berries look quite much like berries, but there's some reproductive element where the seed is exposed. It's not contained actually within a fruit, not a true containment in a fruit. So botanically, okay, you're looking at basically a cone where the seed is would be referred to as a cone. The seed's exposed on the surface of scales. So we have four divisions. The common names are cycads, ginkgo, neophytes, and conifers. This picture here shows one representative of each of those phyla. The first one we're going to talk about is the cycads, and this is a cycad right here, the Cycadophyta example. And then we'll talk about ginkgo. This is the ginkgo or maidenhair tree. And then I think I've got it swapped. I think I talk about Coniferophyta next, which is probably the single group that's most familiar to you. This is a blue spruce. And then we have Gnetophyta, which there's several examples. I believe this is a picture of the ephedra bush that grows native in western United States. If not, it is the Welwitschia, which oh gosh, where's that? I used to think that I had read that was in Australia, but I think actually it's an African plant, Southern Africa, if I remember right now. I've been corrected. Anyway, you have to look that one up. But I talk about the ephedra one when I get to that section. Whoop, I did not want to do that. Okay, back on track. Our first division, division. Okay, why not phylum? Because remember the story I've told you about how in 1954 Whitaker proposed a new classification plan and people joined in, and it became our standard 5-kingdom classification plan, which was then later rearranged and changed to where we moved everything into a domain, which didn't exist, something above kingdom. And so we have domain archaea, domain bacteria, and then domain eukarya. And within domain eukarya, we now have the 4 kingdoms that were 4 of the 5 of Whitaker's. The 5th kingdom, Monera, has been put over into the other 2 domains and split up as appropriate due to cell structure, as we previously talked about. What was used, from what I've read, I wasn't involved in any of those conversations. I wasn't around yet, but the zoologists outnumber the botanists, and so the classification hierarchy of kings, play chess on fine green sand, yes, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, that fit what the zoologists use, the animal scientists, that fit with the majority. Botanists had a different classification system using different words, maybe some of the same words, but they had them at different levels of the hierarchy and in different locations and etc. So phylum was used, but not at that same level right under kingdom. They had the word division and stubbornly kept it okay for a while. When I was in college and I was studying agronomy, I had to take a lot of plant science classes, and some of the books were a little bit old. So the textbooks we were using were a little bit old, and they didn't necessarily reflect the changes. And I found it very confusing to read about some of the older classifications of the plants. Okay, so you don't have to worry about anything in this class other than that division can be changed, interchanged with phylum. And so here, in order to keep, I don't know, in practice with the botanists, I've done that. Recently, I have noticed in publications that they're using the term phylum instead of division. Uh, previous textbook had it split differently. I mean, they had it division was out. Your current textbook have phylum for everything and doesn't mention division. So I don't know if that's because the author of our textbook is not a botanist, or if that is really representing a greater trend of the botanists who were trained more at the time I was and later, recognizing that phylum and division are the same. So let's just keep it simple and go with phylum. Anyway, that's what you're seeing there, and I want you to be aware of that. So if you do take a botany class or any other classes in science after this where they're using the term division for plants, you understand, because having this class on your transcript, you'd be expected to understand that, possibly. Okay. These are, as you can kind of see in that picture, right here, palm-like trees. They look like palms, and we've got a cone structure here in the center. And they're really cool. These are found, okay, you can see them sometimes in malls in big pots. And I know when I first saw them years ago, I saw them in the Galleria in Dallas, and I thought, oh, those are some really impressive big, tall, fake plants, because nothing that tall or big, no tree that tall or big could actually live in a pot that size. These are granted big pots, but still, um, when you look at a tree, a general tree, uh, there is, by rule of thumb, more tree below the ground than there is above the ground. So at a minimum, if you're looking at a tree and you take that thing and like turn it upside down and stick all those branches under the ground, you're getting an idea of what the roots might look like as far as amount of soil, under soil they take up. But actually, that would be the conservative estimate. There would be a lot more roots than just that. It would go beyond that. There's more tree below the ground. Still pretty impressive. However, I've talked about tropical plants, the rainforest type plants that are used to growing in poor soils. I mentioned, I think, the walking tree to you. And the reason it's able to, uh, you know, contract the cells in its roots and kind of pull itself along the ground so that it has this appearance it's moved, and it is moving, but it has appearance it's kind of walked over a period of time, uh, is because those roots don't go very far into the soil surface. Okay, if they were really embedded deep, deep down into the ground and there were lots and lots and lots of them, that couldn't happen. So there's a difference in the cycads, especially those ones like you might see in the mall, have very, very shallow rooting structures and not very deep and not very much. So in that case, there's not more tree below the ground as there is above the ground. And I was amazed when I went up to the second story of the Galleria, and there was one of these cycad palm-looking frond things hanging over the railing of the uh, promenade, basically around that second story. And so I looked around and nobody was looking, and I took because it was such a convincing looking. I mean, having worked in a flower shop, that was an impressive looking silk. It looked real. I mean, that leaf looked like if I pinched it with my fingernail, sap would come out. I knew it wouldn't. It's a silk, but I still had to reach out there and touch it and pinch it with my fingernail, and lo and behold, sap poured out. And I'm like, I was baffled. I did not understand. Everything I had learned about plants at that point in time told me that it was impossible if that was a living plant, a living tree, okay, to have that small amount of soil in a pot supporting something that large. So pretty amazing things. They don't grow well here. I've seen some people in Tulsa who have them planted around their pool. They cover them up with white insulating plastic. In the wintertime, I've never talked to any of those homeowners personally. I don't know any of them, but I talked to somebody one time who knew one of them, And I was told that what he does is he actually wraps that electric tape that you plug in, okay, like you can use around hot water pipes. He or any pipes to keep them from freezing in the wintertime. He did that around those trees and then put the insulation around it to keep them at a specific low temperature, but warm enough to not be damaged by cold temperatures during the wintertime. So a lot of effort and expense there in keeping something like that alive this far north. They do grow in Dallas. My husband's aunt had one in her yard for a while without any damage. They even got a Christmas snowstorm there once, and it survived a day or two of cold pretty well, as I recall. But other than that, they pretty much need to stay very warm. These were most common, according to the fossil record. We find lots of evidence that they were pretty numerous in the Mesozoic era, which you're familiar with Mesozoic era. We've talked about that a lot, being the age of the dinosaurs. We've talked about the end of the Mesozoic and all of that. So sometimes another term, subtitle for that era is the age of cycads and dinosaurs. Division Ginkgophyta. Ginkgo or maidenhair tree. There's only one known living species in this entire division, and that is it. It was cultivated for ages in Asian ornamental and temple gardens. It has been a revered plant in the Asian countries, many of them, for generations. The only two nurseries, at least at the time I took my botany class from Dr. Tyrrell at OSU, the only two nurseries in the world that raised these were there. Okay. I want to say one was in China and one was in like Tibet, but don't quote me on that because I'm reaching back years. This was his favorite tree. He was instrumental in getting a row of them planted across the street in this little park-like area that used to exist east of Ag Hall. That area is no longer there. Those trees were removed to put in the Bellman Research Center. But while I was going to school there, they were there. He talked about them a lot, so I observed them a little bit, and they were pretty and unique. The leaves are very interesting. They have kind of a fan look to them. Some people think it looks like hair flowing over a young woman's shoulders, therefore maidenhair. The leaves are two-part. That's the species name, biloba. It's Ginkgo biloba. So we pronounce it biloba. It's okay either way, but the bi means two. The thing about these is that you remember me talking about Dutch elm disease wiping out our elm trees and how the pollution was so much that young trees couldn't come back and grow in those areas. So we lost what was filtering the pollution out of the air. The pollution took over, and then that prevented anything else from coming back that might filter the pollution. It was a spiral we got into with that. What they found was that this ginkgo tree does indeed grow well in polluted air, possibly because it evolved in an era in which we think there was more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We think when the dinosaurs were here, there was probably more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we have today. And these trees were around then as well. Okay, not as much as the cycads maybe, but these are a very ancient genetic lineage here. What they planted in the cities, though, was only male trees because the female smells like, I'm told, rotten meat. Okay, smells bad certain times of the year when it's reproducing. So I understand that's not very long period of time, just a couple of weeks, but people still don't want that smell in the cities or around their houses and stuff like that. So the only known female trees in the world are maintained in these two nurseries, and what is made from them are clones. Male trees are grown and cloned. So what we have when we plant these is basically clone genetic stock. Everything is identical. So again, we're one disease away from having all of those wiped out, all the ones that were planted to replace elms. And I know they weren't planted as widespread as the elms were. Other trees have been used once once the pollution kind of got under control a little bit in some places, they started planting other trees back, and in other places, they just haven't planted anything back. Okay, and then where they could, they planted some of these. Dr. Trill was worried about these trees, though, and the fact that, in that sense, they could be one step away from extinction. We've got one disease that can affect the plants. We got two nurseries. He said they share genetic stock. I wouldn't know, but he would know because he was uh, an expert in that field. And he said that they would probably pass the disease back and forth between each other before they even knew it existed. And because the rest of the world has these male clones, then there's no female stock somewhere else, in the wild, so to speak, that might be able to be a reservoir for us to go back to and get new genetic information and reestablish the tree. So again, getting ready to move into genetics before too long, and you're seeing an example again of where genetic diversity is considered to be highly important for survival of a species, and when it gets diminished, where the diversity isn't very diverse, scientists get a little nervous about that species. Division Coniferophyta, conifers. This is the largest of the gymnosperm groups, and it includes our cone-bearing pine, cedar, spruce, fir, and redwood trees, and probably some others we can name too. But these things here are your basic Christmas trees. Well, maybe the redwood's a little bit big, but anything that you traditionally would think of as an evergreen that you would haul into the house for a Christmas tree probably is a coniferophyta. Okay, pine, cedar, spruce, fir. Those are our standards. They all have these needle-like leaves, which are well adapted to cold weather and high winds. You've seen pictures of those needle-like leaves on the first lab I gave you to identify pine trees. And the evergreens, we call them the cedars, it's called scales. Okay, the leaves are referred to as scales, but it's still the same kind of needle-like, thin, very tough, waxy coating on the outside too. That helps them be able to survive throughout the year, be this evergreen that they are. That's one of their adaptations that they have. They have well-developed roots and stems. They're typically tall trees. They can withstand temperature extremes. They can withstand dryness. The pollen grains are transferred by wind. And the growth of pollen tube occurs so there's no dependence upon water for fertilization. The cone protects the megametophyte and developing zygote. And seed protects the embryo. Okay, and that's what we see with the seeded plants is that we've got a protected embryo, okay, inside the seed. And that seed is going to provide and store nutrients and helps to disperse the species away from the parent tree. So I've mentioned before that no plant really wants its babies growing up under its feet because they're going to compete for water and nutrients out of the soil. So they try to, evolutionarily, they've devised methods, okay, to get their spores or their seeds, whichever, in this case, we're talking about seeds, spread away from where they are. Conifers grow in many, many areas on the earth, and they're very useful to us. We use a lot of them for building for wood, construction, and production of paper. So yellow and white pines in particular, we grow those as a crop nowadays. We plant them and we grow them, and in a certain number of years, they will be harvested, and another grouping will be come back in and planted right where they were amongst the stumps. Weyerhaeuser, they own large tracts of land, okay, eastern Oklahoma, southeastern Oklahoma actually, and parts of Arkansas and northern Louisiana. I don't know where else, maybe Texas, probably. They grow these trees in these forests just for the purpose of harvesting them for wood and paper. Other wood companies do too. I just happen to know about Weyerhaeuser. So, or I'm saying that it's probably like I'm getting a feeling in my mind that somewhere I remember warehouses are sold to somebody else, but it's still going on, whatever the company's name is, and I may be confusing something else. But anyway, we can only afford to grow them up to the size where they will barely make a 2x4. Okay, and that's why your larger cuts of wood are so expensive. And all wood is getting more and more expensive because there's more demand for it. There's only so much area we can devote to growing it, and they can only grow so fast. Okay, so the bigger pieces of wood, that's dependent upon the diameter of the tree. How many of those larger, wider pieces of lumber you can get out of a tree is dependent upon the diameter of the tree. And so you've got to let the tree grow more years. And that's an expense. Okay. It's taking up that part of the soil and land for more years when you could be coming along and planting younger trees, harvesting those and planting new ones and getting another crop again. Okay. So economics. Other than lumber and paper, we also get chemicals such as resin extracts, um, things like pine tar for water sealing and turpentine. Okay. um, things, excuse me, components that are used in paint thinners, um, waterproofing, lots and lots of things. The list can get extensive there. Sorry for throat got a little scratchy there. I had to get a drink. Okay, the oldest trees known to man may actually be in this group. And you're probably, if you haven't read ahead of me here on the slide just now, probably thought, well, duh, she mentioned redwood trees, of course. Redwoods may not be the oldest. They may not be the largest either, but we're going to say they are. I'll tell you who argues with that or what the argument is against it here in a little bit. But yeah, the largest trees may be the redwood trees in California at about 2,000 years old. They're still not the oldest, but they can go to be more than 90 meters tall and also wide enough that there's one out there that got rot in the trunk. And when the rotted out, it's probably helped being carved out by humans. It was wide enough you can drive a car through it, and that tree's still standing. I've been through it twice, as once as a child and once as a teenager, and nobody can drive through it anymore. Okay, the car exhaust was causing damage to the inside of it because there's so many people would line up and wait to drive through this tree. It was just kind of cool. I mean, it's like driving through a covered bridge in a sense, but you knew you were driving through a living being. And that was what was fascinating to me, uh, especially the second time I did it because I was older and understood more the biology. But it was just fascinating to me that the outer part of the tree is what's living. Okay, the bark, the phloem is out there, and the xylem is with it underneath, kind of like layer underneath, and they're packed there together. But anyway, the inside is pretty much all dead wood, and the tree just grows more and more on the outside. And so it was just, like I said, fascinating to see that on a living tree. So they're the biggest. But the oldest is actually this thing called a bristlecone pine. And I need to, at some point, get a picture and stick in here, but I keep not doing it. You can Google it and look it up. It looks like the shrubbiest, most twisted, tortured tree I think I've ever seen. Every picture, not just one tree, but there's pictures of a few. They live in the mountainous areas of New Mexico, and that may overlap into some other states too, but New Mexico is usually cited as the state that they're mostly in. And they can withstand really, really severe temperature changes. So things like uh, really, really hot in the daytime because it's like almost a desert mountain area, very dry too, and then freezing cold temperatures at night, and especially the wintertime because the altitude's high enough that even though it's south, it still gets cold. So they grow very and slow and steady. These are the turtles of the tree world, possibly slow and steady, and they just keep on plugging away at the race of life, of growing. So a few of these trees have died. I think they took maybe some core samples of some living ones. Anyway, they found that if you count the rings in these trees, you're looking at trees that are over 4,500 years old. So something to think about with plants. When we get to genetics, I'll try to talk about why this is the case. But plant cells are immortal. Okay, animal cells, most animal cells are not. So animals are going to die. Animals have short-lived cells, short-lived time period in a sense in relation to plants. Plants will die because of conditions. Um, yeah, there's some that do just kind of reach an age and that's it for them. But oftentimes when the main tree dies, here they come right back up from the roots again. Uh, so that particular organism actually is not dead. Okay, the main part of it, the main growth that we viewed as that tree may no longer exist, and we think, oh, here's a new tree coming up in its place. It's really just new growth of the same tree. And so if the rootstock doesn't die, then sometimes some trees can just keep on regrowing and repeat that for endless number of times. I'm not going to get into life cycles with you. Again, still following my same procedure. Anything in here, anything on this page, I've already talked about on another page if I want you to know it, that the seeds are dispersed by wind. The ovules exposed on a scale of a seed cone. That was all back in the first slide, so we'll move on. Netophita, Needham plant, the Welwitschia plant, and the ephedra plant. These are the ones in the gymnosperms that they think angiosperms evolved out of, or the common ancestor that we have with these. We branched off from them. They branched off from it. Okay, we branched off of this common ancestor more recently than the conifers branched off our common line. The cycads branched off, or the ginkgos branched off our common line. Okay, with the angiosperms. So let's talk about the next. We angiosperms, the next line. We're not animals, but angiosperms. So what we're going into next. Just personified myself with flowering plants there. Sorry. Okay. Um, so unlike other gymnosperms, they have vessel elements, which is a particular type of cell that you see in the xylem of angiosperms. Xylem is made up of a couple of different cell types. Okay, again, that's botany. We're not going to get into that. But the other xylem cells didn't have that component, that type of cell to them, and these do, and the angiosperms do. And they undergo something called double fertilization, which I will talk about with the angiosperms. Okay, so that's going to be it for this one. So I will stop the recording.